So Gen Z is currently graduating from college into one of the hardest job markets and worst economies in recent memory. And oftentimes, I think for new grads especially, it can feel a little bit overwhelming. Home prices are out of control. Your student loans are finally starting to kick in. You have to make those payments. Oftentimes, students have to take out loans for college. There's really just no other way around it because the price of college is also out of control. Don't even think about owning a home. Blah, blah, blah. The list goes on. And that's even if you find a job in the first place, which is a problem in itself. So it can feel a little bit overwhelming. But in this video, I want to go over exactly why I don't think Gen Z is as cooked as maybe some people make it out to seem. And I can go over exactly what I would do if I was graduating right now, because honestly, I graduated college 3 years ago, and it wasn't that much different than it is now. Sure, things have changed a little bit, even in terms of like AI and the job market itself. But we can talk about exactly what I would do if I was graduating today. So how I would get a job and how I would get ahead financially and avoid getting behind financially, more importantly. But what we're going to do for this is we're actually going to do this through the lens of somebody else's video. I've been watching him quite a bit lately. His channel name is Early Exit. He does kind of a commentary over gameplay type of thing, which I've really been enjoying watching lately. It kind of brings back some nostalgia. The title of his video is Gen Z is getting priced out of their own country. I do agree with some of it maybe not so much, and some of it maybe I have some different advice than he had. But still, it's really a well-made video. He pulls in some data points, which I really appreciate. So let's go over that. Oh, also, before I begin, my baby boy is right next to me. I have off work this morning, so I'm with him. He's very talkative this morning, so if you hear him in the background, yeah, that's what it is. There he is.
I need to tell you something that's been eating at me for months now, and I think a lot of you guys are going to relate to this. I'm 24 years old. I make $125,000 as a software engineer in New York City. And before you click away thinking this is some humble brag from a privileged tech bro, just hear me out for a second, because what I'm about to share is going to make you realize how broken things actually are. I worked minimum wage and retail jobs for 10 years to pay my way through community college and university. I graduated with zero debt, zero student loans. I did everything right. Studied computer science, learned to code, got the good job everyone talks about. On paper, I won. I'm living the dream that guidance counselors sell to high school students. But here's what nobody tells you about.
So one thing right off the bat is he talks about graduating college with no student loan debt. If you have any way to do this, this is one of the most important steps you can take to not get behind after graduating. If I could have done things differently, that's exactly what I would have done. I kind of meandered along in college a little bit, ended up having to go an extra semester, which, that in itself is like whatever, $6,000-$7,000 just for that one semester of classes to finish up my degree. If you can graduate with no student loan debt, anyway, if you can work your way through school, if you can have parents help you, whatever it is, try to do that, because it's going to set you up so much better financially to start. And he's going over exactly what he did, and sure, he says, it sounds like I'm living the dream, blah, 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 but I'm not. Really, the only reason he's able to afford, I think, living in New York City on that salary, which admittedly is a pretty good salary out of school, but keep in mind it is in New York City, which is one of the most expensive cities in the entire world. Compared to other places in the country, maybe it's not $125,000 salary in New York City is probably more close to like $80,000 elsewhere in the country. Like, that's how expensive New York City is. And he'll go over kind of his rent, I think, in this video, if not maybe one of his other videos. But if you can do that to get ahead financially, definitely try your hardest, or at least to graduate with as little student loan debt as you possibly can.
That dream. My take-home pay after taxes is $79,000 per year. And my girlfriend, she graduated into one of the worst job markets for new graduates in decades. Tech layoffs, they're everywhere. Hiring freezes, company replacing entry-level positions with AI, or the offshoring of entry-level jobs. She's been grinding out hundreds of applications, rewriting her resume over and over, working minimum wage jobs while she waits for something, literally anything in her field to open up. So I'm kind of supporting both of us on that $79,000. In one of the most expensive cities in America, we live with two other roommates just to make the math even work. Just think about that for a second. Someone in my position doing everything society told me to do, making what most people would consider really good money, is barely just staying ahead. We're sharing a place with roommates. We're not going on.
All right, I gotta stop it there again, because sure, I think one thing too is that a lot of new grads think they're just going to waltz into a position like this, and then they're immediately going to be able to do all these things that they've always dreamed of doing. Nice vacations, new car, new house, blah, 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 living on my own. And well, yes, it's possible. And it's possible relatively soon after graduating, depending on your situation. I don't think it's the most likely outcome. And even, if you're doing things right, quote unquote, like, sorry, a little bit of a spit up situation. even if you're doing things right, quote unquote, like he is here, where he's, or even if you're doing things right, like he is here, you're still going to have that time where you are building your wealth, you're paying off debts, and you're kind of building yourself up into eventually down the line being able to enjoy some of those things that you've always wanted to do. Similarly, I have a pretty good salary especially for where I live. No complaints there. My wife has a great salary as a nurse. We're doing well financially, bringing in money, but we're still working through paying off debts, and I've been able to do some amazing things already. We own a house, or at least, we have a house. We have a mortgage. We don't own it, but we have a house. We have our vehicles. We have our son. We're able to get all the food we want for him, and all the food that he needs, all the food we need, and be able to live comfortably. And we're still able to take some vacations once in a while. Nothing crazy, but we've been able to enjoy life, and we're just still working through paying off debt and then working on building wealth. So don't expect to graduate college and just walk into this situation where you're taking crazy vacations and you have this huge house and all these things that you've always wanted, because it's just not going to happen, especially not if you're doing things the right way, where you actually have the money to afford to be able to do these things rather than just taking out, personal loans or building up credit card debt, because that's not the way to go. And I think we'll get into that a little bit more later in the video. But let me stop rambling and we'll watch some of this.
Buying new cars or thinking about buying property even. We're just surviving. Comfortably, sure, but surviving is nonetheless the word for it. If someone in my position is barely keeping ahead, then the traditional American path isn't just hard anymore, it's fundamentally broken for most people my age. So let me just walk you through what's actually happening to our generation. And then I'll show you the alternative path that I'm personally taking. Here are just the plain numbers and a real plan. And it's kind of why the job market isn't just being tough right now, it's actually systematically broken. Graduating into a weak job market creates what economists call a wage penalty that can last to 10 to 15 years. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in lifetime earnings just lost just because you happen to graduate in 2025 instead of 2018 or 2019 or even 2020. You're not starting from the same place as people who just a few years before you started from. You're starting well behind them. And that gap actually never fully closes in your lifetime. See, even the National Bureau of Economic Research covers this. The long-term effects of graduating in a recession or recession-like environment has...
Yeah, and just quickly touching on this, I think the reason for that is oftentimes when you're continuing on in your career, you're getting raises, transferring companies, whatever it is, oftentimes they're using your current salary or current wages as a negotiating chip. If you're currently making $25 an hour, let's say, that's kind of the starting point for your next career. Like, oh, we'll bring you up from $25 to $30 an hour. And when you think about it, like, with your current situation, yeah, that sounds great. Whereas somebody who's starting maybe at $40 an hour, they might bring them up to $50 an hour. It's just like you're at the bottom of that growth curve, and you just have to keep taking those incremental increases until you start to actually, build real wealth and build your income that way. And I think what he's saying here is people graduating into a weak job market like that have to take the jobs that they don't necessarily want just to pay the bills. And by not necessarily want, probably a lower salary gig where, if they find something they want in the future, they're using that salary or those wages as a negotiating chip when deciding their next salary for that next position.
Earning losses that eventually do fade, but it takes 8 to 10 years to even just catch up earning wise with peers that graduated a little bit before you. And again, that gap is still there your entire life. That gap never actually fully closes. See, my girlfriend is living proof of this. She's smart, she's capable, she's willing to work hard, but just because of timing, she's paying for it. And she's not alone. This is the norm for Gen Z graduates right now. Now, I'm not going to be doom and gloom because there is some good things that came out of this. It's forcing us to develop skills that traditional stable employment never actually teaches. It teaches you income diversification, adaptability, self-reliance, learning to create value outside of traditional job structures. These are exactly the skills you need when you're building towards something completely different, when you're planning an exit strategy instead of a traditional path. The job market being terrible is actually training us for independence, even though that's not what it really intends. And I'm not saying it's actually good. I'm saying we can still extract value from a bad situation. And let's talk about college for a second, because this is where the broken system really becomes obvious. College tuition has increased 180% since the early 2000s. And you want to know how much entry-level salaries have increased in the same time? When you adjust for inflation. So yes, when you adjust for inflation, it's actually a grand total of nothing. It has been completely flat adjusted for inflation. And you may be like, oh, I was earning this amount of money back then, and now I'm earning this. That is because you were looking at the nominal change and not the real change in salaries. In addition, you also have to remember you probably bought a house in that time, meaning your cost of living has actually barely increased compared to somebody just graduating, just trying to buy a house. Let that sink in. Education costs way more.
Yes, and I totally agree with this point. Like, the rate of change of the cost of college vastly exceeds the rate of change of salaries in the US. And he brought up that data point showing that when you actually look at real salary change and keeping in mind inflation, salaries have not really gone up in the last 20, 25 years. Sure, paper or raw monetary value, salaries have went up. But oftentimes that is only keeping pace, if not under the level of inflation, especially that we've seen in the past 4 or 5 years, really since COVID. And sure, you can look at what the news says and say that inflation's coming down. The rate of inflation is coming down. Inflation itself is not coming down. Prices are still increasing. They're just increasing a little bit slower than they did a few years ago during COVID. And during that same time period, the cost of college has went up, as you see, over 180%. And so what this means for you is if you're in college, make sure you're getting a degree in something actually marketable, something in STEM, data, tech, engineering, healthcare. These are the degrees that are going to get you jobs after graduating with just a bachelor's degree. Now, sure, there's things like becoming a doctor or becoming a lawyer, which I'm sure there's the stuff you need advanced degrees for, but that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm just talking about bachelor's degrees. Make sure you're in something that actually has real job prospects on the back of that. With something like business, though, I think you have a marketable degree. However, I think there's so many people that graduate with business degrees that you might find yourself in a tough situation trying to find a job, especially related exactly to your major. So that's just something to keep in mind. But the other thing you can do is try to come out of school with as little debt as possible. Like I talked about earlier, it just makes it easier on you financially. If you're still looking for a job after graduating, that you don't have to be worrying about paying those student loans. I know there's some kind of forgiveness in terms of like, you don't have a job yet, you can't pay your student loans yet, but and there's kind of that grace period. But more and more, it's becoming difficult to find a job right after graduation, and sometimes I think recent grads are having to wait 6 months, a year, or even longer to find that full-time gig that they've been looking for. So keep that in mind.
To somebody just graduating, just trying to buy a house. Let that sink in. Education costs way more and basically gets you the same earning power as it did 25 years ago with more student loan debt. Actually, on average, it's about $37,000. And it's not uncommon to see people owing over $100,000 or more in student loans. So yeah, you're paying for the same degree that gets you the same job, except now you're starting tens of thousands of dollars in.
Yes. And the other thing real quick with this is try to keep your degree as low cost as possible. Don't try to go out of state to a private school just because that's where you want to go. You want to have fun. You want to party, blah, blah, blah. If it's going to be 2 or 3 times more expensive than going to an in-state state school, don't do it. Now maybe there's some exceptions to the rule where, maybe if you're going to Harvard or you're going to somewhere that, has kind of some prestige to it, maybe sure, then you could be willing to spend a little bit more, because I think on the back end of that's a much more marketable degree from that college than maybe your state school. But otherwise, I think going with the cheapest local in-state school is going to be your best option, because usually in-state tuition is a lot cheaper than out-of-state tuition. And so if you can graduate with $30,000 in debt in your student loans as opposed to $80,000, you're just going to be that much better off financially in the long run.
Debt before even earning your first paycheck, and your first paycheck is actually less than what it would have been 25 years ago in terms of inflation. That is objectively the worst and most terrible ROI I've ever heard of. Like, if this was any other investment, everyone would recognize it and be like, that's a scam. Now, there are ways to avoid this trap. You can go to a community college, work through school, but most people my age get sold a different story. They go to a good school, get a degree, just a degree because it's the same, and say the job will come. You'll eventually pay that debt off, but except eventually now means a decade or more of payments, and the jobs now aren't even there. And even when they are there, the salaries haven't kept up with the pace of that debt. This is forcing Gen Z to think more critically about education ROI. More people are questioning whether a $200,000 degree or even a $100,000 degree even makes sense anymore, when it leads to the same job, or the same pay at least, as a trade school certification. So now we're routing around the traditional system because we have to. The system is broken, but we're learning to see the alternatives. And that skill, being able to question the system.
And quickly, I think a general rule of thumb with this is that you don't want your student loan debt to exceed like almost your entry level salary. So if you're going to be making $60,000 out of school in your first job, you don't want your student loan debt to exceed that $60,000 mark, because really, ideally, you want to be able to pay off your student loan debt in like 2 to 3 years. I was able to pay off my student loan debt, which I think came out to like $35,000. I was working through school and paid off a couple of years or a year and a half of school before I graduated, but I was able to pay off that $35,000 within the first year. And you do that by, in his example, living with roommates, staying with your parents for a year or two after school if they allow it. Really, you got to take advantage of anything like that that will allow you to save money out of school, because it's not like I said earlier, you can't just get the job and expect all these nice things to come, like your own place, cars, trips, houses, blah, 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 because you really need to set yourself up financially before you're able to actually afford those kinds of things without taking out lines of credit or personal loans or anything like that. All right, in the rest of this video, he kind of goes over some other things that are trapping Gen Z after they graduate, things like the Social Security situation, things like having to do side hustles just to make it by, healthcare costs and insurance, which is kind of another thing forcing you to get a job, because it makes a lot more sense to have, the benefits of working for a company as opposed to paying for insurance yourself, because it's an insanely high price to pay for it yourself. Now, I think he goes a different direction with this video and as far as the solution to this, but personally, I think the solution is just getting control of your personal finances. I've talked about this a lot on the channel, especially recently, things like controlling the cost of your college, things like preparing yourself to get a job after graduation by getting an internship, a research position, or doing self-projects while you're in school, which I'll link a video to that in a minute if you want to check that out. But getting yourself out of debt, paying off your student loans as quickly as possible, not making the same mistake that I did with a vehicle, me and my wife did, not going crazy with a wedding if you're getting married or plan on getting married. All these things are controlling your costs, getting yourself out of debt, which allows you a little bit more freedom in the job that you want to take, in the job that you have to take. You don't have to do all these other things and consider all these other things when you're free financially. So that's the journey that I'm on right now. I hope that's the journey you're on as well. But like I said, check this video out next if you want to see exactly how you can get a job after college by doing a couple of the things that I mentioned earlier. So check that one out, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks.